My name is Sarah Matthews, and 6 weeks before my wedding, I was coordinating emergency supplies for wildfire evacuation centers outside Seattle when my mother called. She didn't ask if I was safe or how the wedding preparations were going. She simply said my wedding could wait because my sister Victoria's engagement party was more important. Before I could answer, my father took the phone telling me my wedding was just a party and not to be selfish. For most of my life, those words would have worked. I would have apologized, rearranged my life, and pretended it was my decision. Instead, I looked at the glowing emergency map on my computer and felt a cold, sudden clarity. I whispered that I understood and I hung up. They assumed I was submitting to their demands. What I actually meant was that I finally understood my own worth. 5 hours later, my mother had left 11 frantic voicemails. By the last one, she was screaming so loudly her voice cracked. My fiancé, Elliot, listened quietly. When the recording ended, he turned his laptop toward me with a soft smile, showing a search page filled with my name. My parents had Googled me, and through me they had finally looked into him. Until that moment, they had treated Elliot like an ordinary, unambitious software guy lucky to marry into their family. They had no idea who he really was, what multi-billion-dollar technology company he controlled, or why my father had spent the last 8 months desperately trying to secure a meeting with his firm. They were about to learn that postponing my wedding was the smallest mistake they had ever made. My family's favoritism was never hidden. It was just framed as normal. Victoria was the sensitive, gifted prodigy destined for greatness, while I was the dependable one. I eventually learned that dependable just meant I could be neglected without causing trouble. It meant I paid my own college tuition while my parents funded Victoria's private design school in Los Angeles. It meant I spent Christmas morning fixing a burst pipe in their basement while Victoria filmed sponsored holiday videos upstairs. When our grandmother left us equal inheritances, my parents convinced me to loan mine to my father's struggling construction consultancy, while Victoria used hers to launch a lifestyle channel. I chose a career as an emergency logistics coordinator because disasters made far more sense than my family. In a crisis, people stated what they needed directly. Nobody disguised emotional neglect as love, and nobody called exploitation a family tradition. That evening, I found Elliot in our kitchen tightening a cabinet handle in his faded sweater. Nothing about him suggested wealth or influence, but emergency agencies nationwide relied on technology his company, Atlas Response Systems, had created. Elliot founded Atlas after losing his brother in a hurricane evacuation due to failed communication networks. Today, Atlas was a $4 billion enterprise coordinating real-time data for hospitals, governments, and rescue teams. Yet Elliot avoided publicity, keeping a low profile. My family only knew he worked in software consulting. My mother once called him unambitious, my father questioned his ability to provide, and Victoria joked that he dressed like an IT repairman. When I told Elliot about my mother's phone call, he poured tea and asked if I still wanted my parents at the wedding. I admitted I only wanted the version of them that never existed, a mother who cared and a father who was proud. Elliot held my hand and reminded me that my mother declaring what she wanted didn't make it my reality. Victoria had been dating commercial real estate broker Mason Cole for 9 months. When he proposed during a sponsored Napa weekend, Victoria immediately planned a massive, brand-partnered engagement party overlooking Lake Washington. Her chosen date was the Saturday right before my wedding. That was already frustrating. But then my mother decided Victoria needed my exact event planner, florist, photographer, and venue arrangements. She even wanted my rehearsal dinner moved, because Victoria's sponsor demanded exclusive family access that weekend. Victoria's event was deliberately built around my wedding because, to her, public attention was the only proof of love. When my father texted me to apologize to my mother before things became embarrassing, Elliot asked what would happen if I refused. I told him they would escalate. He calmly replied, "Then let them." That night I gathered every contract securing my venue, catering, and vendors with accounts my family couldn't touch. For the first time, their disapproval couldn't cancel my plans. It could only expose them. The next morning, the sabotage began. My florist called to confirm a request from my mother to transfer my floral arches and aisle arrangements to Victoria's event. claiming I wanted a simpler look. Attached to her email was Victoria's order, an exact copy of my wedding design. Victoria wasn't just trying to outshine me. She planned to use my design and post it online first. I password-protected my vendor accounts and gathered records. By noon, the hotel informed me someone claiming to represent my family tried to move 6 of my guests to Victoria's hotel. By 2, my photographer forwarded an offer from Victoria, offering extra money if he abandoned my rehearsal dinner early. By 4, my aunt sent an itinerary where my rehearsal was labeled optional Sarah activity, while Victoria's brunch was marked primary family celebration. I didn't cry. I documented every detail into a file titled Wedding Interference. When Elliot saw my file, he mentioned that my father's company, Whitmore Civic Development, had submitted 3 partnership proposals to Atlas Response Systems. My father had been chasing this lucrative contract for a year to secure municipal infrastructure deals, completely unaware that his daughter's unambitious fiancé was the founder and executive chairman. Elliot noted that while my father's company had experience, reviewers had serious concerns about their billing practices and staff turnover. I told Elliot I didn't want our family drama affecting his business, but he gently pointed out that my parents' behavior revealed exactly how they operated when they believed someone held no power over them. That evening, my mother demanded a family meeting at her event design studio. I asked Elliot to attend but keep his identity hidden. I wanted to hear what they would say while they still believed he didn't matter. When we arrived, the conference room was set up like a corporate presentation. Victoria was wearing cashmere with artfully applied makeup to look like she'd been crying, and Mason sat beside her looking uncomfortable. My father immediately took charge, stating that Victoria's party provided valuable marketing exposure for the family business, whereas my wedding was private and provided no commercial value. I called him out for ranking our life events by marketing metrics, but he dismissed my reaction as emotional. My mother insisted Victoria's sponsors had fixed dates while my ceremony was flexible. When I laid down the paper trail of emails, hotel requests and vendor bribes, my mother claimed she was just trying to make the weekend work. Victoria tried to play the victim, shedding tears and accusing me of always resenting her. My mother instantly rushed to comfort her, deploying the same guilt-tripping dynamic I'd endured for 20 years. But this time, I asked Victoria directly if she had offered my photographer extra money to abandon my rehearsal dinner. When she couldn't deny it, Mason turned to her in disbelief, realizing the truth. My mother panicked, trying to lecture Elliot about how close families require compromise. Elliot calmly asked which person in our family was always expected to compromise, challenging her to name a single sacrifice Victoria had ever made for me. My father snapped, warning Elliot that marriage required financial stability, while my mother questioned his career credentials. Victoria even claimed she searched for him online and found no social media presence. Calling it suspicious, my father then offered an insulting deal: delay my wedding by 6 months. Let them evaluate if Elliot was financially realistic, and they would help pay for a new ceremony later. I reminded him they hadn't offered a dime for this wedding. When my mother asked why I was determined to make them enemies, I dropped my final piece of evidence, a transcript of a voicemail my mother had accidentally recorded. In it, Victoria suggested telling relatives I was having a mental breakdown so they wouldn't attend, and my mother agreed, stating they only needed enough cancellations to make the venue look embarrassing, so I'd be forced to postpone. The room went completely silent. Mason stood up, disgusted, and pulled away from Victoria. My father tried to dismiss the meeting, but I made it clear that my vendors were secured. The relatives would receive the truth, and any further interference would be handled legally. Victoria scoffed, believing I was bluffing about legal power, until Elliot calmly mentioned that they had Googled the wrong Elliot Reed. He pulled up the official Atlas leadership page on his phone, revealing his position as founder and executive chairman of a $4 billion corporation. The color drained from my father's face. The man he had been begging for a partnership was sitting right in front of him, wearing a sweater he'd mocked. My mother instantly shifted her tone, offering fake smiles and trying to rewrite history, but Elliot shut it down. He pointed out that they had never cared to ask about his life because they assumed he was useless to them. When my father frantically tried to save his business proposal, Elliot informed him that while he wouldn't personally meddle, the Atlas compliance team was already reviewing Whitmore Civic Development's submission. In fact, my father had illegitimately listed my professional emergency management contacts as commercial assets in his proposal without my consent. Furthermore, his proposal claimed his firm operated on transparency. Yet my evidence proved otherwise. Before the meeting ended, Elliot dropped the final blow. My father's upcoming review meeting with Atlas was officially cancelled due to compliance inconsistencies. Suddenly, every phone on the table began vibrating. Mason had taken the voicemail transcript and sent it directly to his parents, the wealthy patrons funding Victoria's elaborate party. The domino effect was immediate and catastrophic. Mason's parents pulled their financial backing that very night, refusing to fund an event built on sabotaging a wedding. The venue demanded payment by noon, which Victoria couldn't afford, and my father couldn't help because his business accounts were frozen pending an internal audit triggered by the Atlas compliance red flags. By the next morning, major corporate sponsors pulled out from Victoria's event to avoid ethical fallout. Victoria attempted to post a tearful video claiming jealous relatives were sabotaging her, but Mason promptly ended their engagement and released a public statement confirming he left due to her calculated deception. His statement went viral, completely destroying Victoria's online reputation. Over the next few days, my mother called 34 times, while my father sent emails ranging from furious accusations to desperate bribery, offering to attend my wedding if Elliot reopened business talks. We ignored them all. Days later, my mother showed up at my apartment without warning. Instead of apologizing, she demanded I fix Victoria's life and restore my father's business reputation. When I refused, she finally broke down, confessing that she had always favored Victoria because Victoria was anxious and needed constant validation, whereas I was capable and independent. She admitted she expected me to absorb the neglect because I was strong enough to survive it. I told her that love shouldn't just go to whoever creates the biggest emergency. I set my terms, a written retraction sent to every relative she had lied to, a public admission that I didn't cause Victoria's breakup, and their agreement to stay far away from my wedding. 3 days later, my mother issued the written correction to the family. My father, refusing to apologize, tried to go over Elliot's head to the Atlas board chairman, which only resulted in his firm being permanently blacklisted from all future contracts. A week before Victoria's ruined event date, my parents hosted a scaled-down family dinner at my mother's studio, setting a table for 30 people. Only 6 showed up. They sat surrounded by empty chairs and copied flowers, facing the exact isolation they had tried to inflict on me. On my wedding morning, my mother left one last voicemail asking for forgiveness, reminding me that families are supposed to move on. I listened once and deleted it. Real forgiveness does not mean handing toxic people a key back into your life. Elliot and I got married in a restored ferry terminal overlooking Puget Sound. We cut our guest list down to 84 people who truly loved us. My aunt helped me into my dress, and my florist crafted breathtaking arrangements from local cedar and wildflowers. When it was time to walk down the aisle, I walked alone. Not because I lacked support, but because I wanted those first steps into my new life to belong entirely to me. When I reached Elliot, he promised in his vows that he would never ask me to make myself smaller to prove my love. Months later, my father was forced to restructure his firm after losing major contracts, while my mother's studio lost key clients over the controversy. Victoria took a long break from social media, eventually returning with a much smaller, humbled presence. My parents remain outside my life, facing the reality that self-respect is not revenge. I didn't destroy their lives. I simply stopped standing between them and the consequences of their own actions. I used to think being dependable meant carrying every burden my family threw at me, but I finally learned that the only life I was ever truly responsible for holding together was my own.